Robert Duvall spent almost 70 years building one of the most respected careers in American acting. He played a silent, damaged boy in To Kill a Mockingbird. He played a napalm-loving air cavalry colonel in Apocalypse Now. He played a quiet, calculating consigliere in 2 films that are still held up as the high watermark of American cinema. Along the way he worked with nearly every major star of his generation. Brando, Hoffman, Hackman, Pacino, De Niro, Redford, and by almost every public account, he did it without leaving behind a trail of enemies. Duvall was known, if anything, for the opposite, for loyalty to old friends, for staying close to the actors he came up with, for talking warmly about people decades after the cameras stopped rolling. So when people go looking for a Robert Duvall feud, the honest answer is that there isn't much of one. There's no on-the-record story of Duvall trashing Dustin Hoffman, or settling a score with Marlon Brando, or calling out James Caan. Those stories exist online, dressed up as documentary narration, full of phrases like reportedly, and, according to later accounts attributed to Duvall, language designed to sound like sourcing while attaching invented dialogue to real, and in several cases now deceased, people. That's not what this is. This is the one falling out in Duvall's career that actually happened, on the record, with real quotes, involving a real amount of money, and a man Duvall worked with for over a decade before it ended, Francis Ford Coppola. Before any of that, there was the beginning. In 1955, a young man named Robert Selden Duvall used the GI Bill to enroll at the neighborhood Playhouse School of the Theater in New York City, studying under the legendary acting teacher Sanford Meisner. He'd grown up the son of a Navy officer who eventually made Rear Admiral, done a stint in the Army himself, and finished a drama degree at a small college in Illinois before deciding that acting, not the family's expected path into the military, was what he wanted. At the neighborhood Playhouse, Duvall fell in with 2 other young actors who were just as broke and just as unproven as he was, Dustin Hoffman and Gene Hackman. Hoffman and Duvall ended up sharing a walk-up apartment on West 109th Street, splitting rent, scraping by on odd jobs. Duvall worked as a postal clerk and a Macy's stock clerk, and going to auditions together. None of the 3 looked, at the time, like future Oscar winners. Decades later, in a joint interview, Hackman and Hoffman admitted they'd spent years quietly convinced they'd eventually be found out as frauds. Duvall, for his part, remembered Hoffman as the more successful of the 2 of them with women in those years, joking in one interview that Hoffman got more women than anybody, more than Joe Namath. That's the real texture of the Duvall-Hoffman relationship. Not betrayal, not stolen line readings, but 2 hungry young actors living on top of each other in a cramped apartment, each becoming a footnote in the other's origin story. Duvall has said that as their careers progressed and their lives pulled in different directions, he simply drifted out of touch with Hoffman and grew closer instead to James Caan, another actor he met through the same New York circles and later stayed with when visiting California. There's no confirmed public account of a rupture between Duvall and Hoffman, just the ordinary way old roommates can lose touch once real careers, real money, and real distance enter the picture. It was Duvall's connection to Francis Ford Coppola, not to Hoffman or Hackman or Brando, that would end up defining both the best and the most contentious chapter of his professional life. Duvall and Coppola first worked together in 1969 on a low-key road movie called The Rain People, years before either man was famous on the scale they'd later reach. It was the start of a real, extended collaboration. Duvall appeared in Coppola's films throughout the 1970s, a decade that, for Coppola, included some of the most acclaimed American films ever made. Duvall played Tom Hagen, the Corleone family's adopted son and consigliere, in The Godfather, 1972, earning his first Academy Award nomination, and reprised the role in The Godfather Part II, 1974. He also appeared in Coppola's The Conversation and, in 1979, delivered one of the most quoted lines in film history as Lieutenant Colonel Bill Kilgore in Apocalypse Now, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning." Tom Hagen was never the loudest character in The Godfather. He wasn't a blood son of Vito Corleone, and he wasn't the family's muscle. But he was its legal mind, its steady hand, the person both Vito and later Michael Corleone turned to when a problem needed to be thought through rather than reacted to. Alongside Al Pacino's Michael, James Caan's fiery Sonny, and Marlon Brando's Vito, Duvall's Hagen provided the ballast, the character who let the more explosive personalities in the family have somewhere to push against. By any reasonable account, the 4 years he spent inside that story, working alongside Brando, Pacino, and Caan under Coppola's direction, represent the peak of Duvall's collaborative work in Hollywood. That collaboration effectively ended after Apocalypse Now. And when Coppola came calling again, 16 years after the first Godfather, to bring the trilogy to a close, it fell apart. Not over a script disagreement, not over a personality clash on set, but over a spreadsheet. By the time Coppola began assembling The Godfather Part 3 in the late 1980s, the economics of the franchise had shifted enormously. Al Pacino, who had grown from a young unknown cast alongside Brando in the first film into one of the biggest stars in the world, was set to be paid roughly $5 million to return as Michael Corleone. Duvall was offered $1 million to return as Tom Hagen. Duvall didn't object to Pacino earning more than him. He said so directly, years later, in a 2004 interview with Charlie Rose for 60 Minutes too. His issue was the size of the gap. If they paid Pacino twice what they paid me, that's fine, but not 3 or 4 times, which is what they did, Duvall told Rose. It's a telling line, because it isn't the language of wounded ego, it's the language of someone doing arithmetic. Duvall wasn't asking to be the highest-paid actor in the film. He was asking for a number that reflected what he believed Tom Hagen was worth to the story, relative to what the studio was now paying its lead. Coppola and Paramount wouldn't move, and the deal collapsed. What happened next is one of the stranger footnotes in Hollywood history, and it comes from Duvall himself, retold in that same 60 Minutes 2 interview. Trying to salvage the deal, Coppola flew out to Duvall's farm in Middleburg, Virginia, to make his case in person. At some point during the visit, Duvall offered to cook his mother's Maryland crab cake recipe for the director. According to Duvall, Coppola loved the dish enough to ask for the recipe, and then forgot it, calling back at least twice just to get it again. Duvall's read on the story, told with what sounds like genuine amusement rather than bitterness, was that Coppola ended up more preoccupied with retrieving a crab cake recipe than with actually closing the deal that would have brought Tom Hagen back into the family. Coppola has given his own account of the breakdown, discussing it on the DVD commentary track for The Godfather Part 3. His version lines up with Duvall's on the basic facts. Duvall was asking for more money than the production had budgeted for the role, the two sides couldn't bridge the gap, and the character was written out rather than recast. Rather than replace Tom Hagen with a new actor playing the same role, Coppola rewrote the film so that Hagen had died sometime between the second and third films, for reasons the script never specifies. The family's legal counsel was replaced on screen by a new character altogether, played by George Hamilton, a choice that even the film's defenders tend to agree left a hole in the story that no replacement character could fill. It would be easy to flatten this into a story about a fading character actor being petty over a paycheck, but that's not quite what the record shows, and it's worth being precise about what Duvall actually said versus what got built around it afterward. In the same interview where he explained the dispute, Duvall was blunt about his read on the whole production. "I think everybody did it for the money," he said of the decision to make a third Godfather film at all, including, implicitly, himself, Pacino, and Coppola. It wasn't a story he told as a grudge. It was a story he told as a plain account of how the business worked, one he was willing to walk away from rather than accept on someone else's terms. That distinction matters, because Duvall's reputation among the people who actually worked with him doesn't support the idea of a bitter, score-settling actor. When Duvall died on February 15, 2026, at his home in Middleburg at the age of 95, the tributes that came in from his actual collaborators told a very different story than any invented feud could. Al Pacino, the very actor whose Godfather 3 salary had been at the center of the dispute 2 decades earlier, called working with Duvall an honor, describing him as a born actor whose connection with it, his understanding and his phenomenal gift will always be remembered. Robert De Niro, who worked with Duvall on The Godfather Part 2 and later True Confessions, kept his tribute simple and warm: "God bless Bobby. I hope I can live till I'm 95. And Coppola himself, the man on the other side of the Godfather 3 dispute, the director who ultimately wrote Tom Hagen out of his own trilogy rather than pay what Duvall was asking, put out a short statement calling Duvall's death a blow. Whatever tension existed between them over a contract in the late 1980s, it clearly hadn't curdled into anything either man carried publicly for the rest of his life. Michael Keaton, who acted alongside Duvall in 1994's The Paper, remembered spending an afternoon with him on his porch talking about horses. Walton Goggins, his The Apostle co-star, thanked him for changing his life. None of that reads like the legacy of a man defined by feuds. If there's a genuine why behind the only substantiated professional break in Robert Duvall's career, it isn't personal hatred. It's a fairly ordinary, if high-stakes, dispute about what a decades-long collaborator believed his contribution was worth, set against a studio and a director who had a different number in mind, and a director's willingness to simply erase the character rather than pay it. Duvall didn't sue anyone, didn't go on a public campaign against Coppola, and didn't seem to hold the standoff against Pacino personally, despite the fact that the gap between their two paychecks was the entire reason the deal fell apart. He told the story when asked, plainly and even a little wryly, the crab cakes included, and then he went on making films for another 2 decades, eventually winning an Academy Award for Tender Mercies, an Emmy for Lonesome Dove, and a National Medal of Arts in 2005. The clickbait version of Robert Duvall's career wants a villain, a co-star he secretly despised, a betrayal he never forgave, a grudge he carried to the grave. The real version is less dramatic and, honestly, more interesting. It's the story of an actor who spent his whole career being paid less than the leading men standing next to him, who was willing to walk away from one of the most iconic roles in film history rather than accept terms he thought were unfair, and who did it without turning the people involved into enemies. Tom Hagen would have understood. He was, after all, the character in the family who always did the math before anyone else raised their voice.